Hello, students. Mr. Hauger here, and for the duration of this class, we're going to be taking part in a gallery walk or gallery war activity where we take a break from slides and just look at some pictures and think about what life would have been like back in history to try to understand what people's motivations were during World War I. You'll be taking a look at several photos, and for each photo, which would have been a physical station in the classroom, you're going to write down a response to a question or a prompt. You can do this on paper, or you can also do this on a Google Doc and just copy and paste your responses at the very end. And the place for that is clearly marked in modules 1-28 or whatever today's date is. Gallery walk answers, copy and paste here. So with that, let's get started and take a look at some photographs, some primary source evidence of what happened in World War I. Here's station number 1. So you can write a number 1 on your paper and think about this. June 28th, 1914, a Serbian nationalist student, Gavrilo Princip, assassinated the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand and his wife when their open car stopped at a corner on its way out of town. The question is, you're now in Austria-Hungary, if you're an adult, probably going to serve in the army, as 7.8 million people did after their assassinated leader lost his life. What do you think they were thinking? The question for you to respond to in a sentence or two, what motivation do you think that people in Austria-Hungary had to fight? What were they thinking? What was their justification? Why were they motivated to fight and join? Give me a couple of different reasons, and you can pause the video while you write that down, and we'll move on to station 2. August 13th, 1914, station 2. Japan joins World War I, allied to Great Britain since they had a treaty in 1902 to protect each other. And Japan declares war on Germany. Now you're looking at all of the flags of the countries at this point in 1914 that were now involved in the conflict. Many more countries would be joining later, and people from all over the globe would fight. The question is, how did alliances change the course of World War I? How did having so many allied countries with treaties and partnerships, how did having common enemies, how did alliances change the course of this conflict? From just Franz Ferdinand on that day in June getting assassinated. So this can be answered in a simple sentence. Put it into words, think about how that could have happened, and we'll move on to station 3. On September, multiple dates in 1914, was the Battle of Masurian Lakes. 100,000 Russians became prisoners of war in German camps. 100,000 individuals. That's almost twice the population of the city of Brentwood. And in just one battle, became prisoners of war. And take a look at their faces being photographed while they're in prison. And what effect that would have had. And here's the question. With over 8 million prisoners taken over the course of the war, what would be your biggest fear? 2 million of those 8 million would die of disease in prison. That's 25%. What would you be thinking if you were one of these individuals? Each one with a story, a family, a tradition, a reason for being there. Look at the way they're looking at the cameraman. Different expressions on their faces. 8 million total prisoners of war. Wow. All right. We're moving on to the next station, station 4. In the Third Battle of Ypres, July 31st to the 10th of November, 1917. Look at that span of the calendar year. A whole quarter of the year. British armies are struggling to control rail lines, trainways, and were assaulted by Germans on land and at sea. After 4 months of fighting, thousands were dead. The weather had turned, and the offensive ended with neither side gaining ground. Nobody had won any significant territory in this land. People were getting really sick from the weather, from the conditions, getting gangrene, getting disease. Why was the weather almost like another opponent that everybody was fighting during long warfare like World War I or World War II? And at this point, you'd be in a group of 5, and one of the students has to hop on one foot because of trench foot, a disease that claimed 75,000 lives, but survives with an amputated foot. It was horrendous to imagine the conditions. And do you see how looking at pictures and thinking about their actual experiences in an activity like this is quite a bit different than just reading another paragraph or reading another sentence in a slide? These were events that took months of people's lives and left them forever changed, physically, mentally, probably spiritually as well. And we'll move on to Station 5. In the final years of the Ottoman Empire, 1.5 million Armenians were exterminated in camps during ethnic cleansing. The Armenians were blamed publicly for defeat for the Russian Caucasus Army in the Russo-Turkish War decades earlier, and this was a vengeance or a movement against the Armenian people, and it's one of the largest ethnic genocides in world history. Question: why do you think that blame and fault and scapegoats, using other people's as excuses for why there have been hardships, why do you think these are a part of past wars? And what can we learn from horrific side stories of conquest and wars like World War I? There's so many side notes or footnotes that if you just looked at these, they're horrifying enough on their own right. And then you forget that the entire portions of the globe were fighting with each other. And meanwhile, there are pockets of just horrifying details. It's really tough to look at. But why do you think that blame has been a part of these past events and taking it out on a country or people or a group of people? Why do you think that's happened? And what should we learn from it? What should the lesson be for us? That's your question. Okay, so feel free to pause here if you need to, and we'll move on to Station 6. This is the final station. Scene: 1 million tons of ships are sunk by German U-boats by early 1917, 3 years in. And there have been 1 million tons of ships sunk into the oceans and into the seas. Why does technological advance happen oftentimes during warfare? How is it that boats with the specializations to accomplish something like this and submarines with the technology and firepower, why do these things pop up around wartime in World War I, in World War II, and then in the 50s and 60s and 70s during the Cold War? How do these advances happen, and what do they mean to the countries that have them and the countries that don't? 2 or 3 sentences should be fine here as you take a look at one of those vessels, and we close this activity. So I hope this helps you think about what these people who are in these photos were experiencing, what our Earth was seeing in so many different places, and also from our 2021 perspective, all connected by computers and internet connections and sitting in a country that relatively at home hasn't seen these things happen on our own landscapes outside of September 11th and Pearl Harbor Day. What does it mean to countries where war has still been a pocket of existence since 100 years ago and even further back beyond? It's quite an undertaking to try to consider what all of the consequences are that have stemmed from that day. And this is where we'll leave the activity. Take your responses from those 6 questions, turn them in by Canvas or email. And I don't want to use the word enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed this activity, but I hope you found it beneficial. I hope it helps you think, because when we can think through other people's shoes and experiences, we can try to determine what led to these events, and that might inform us on how events might unravel in the future and what we can do and learn from past experiences. Thank you so much for your attention and for being so great all year round, and I'll see you in class again. Thank you very much.